Imagine that you are a college student in today's day and age, and you are wondering, is it cheating to ask ChatGPT for a little bit of guidance, advice, or maybe a little bit of research, or maybe to find out what the answer is to a quiz, an exam, or something? We have entered into an unprecedented age of reliance on artificial intelligence in a variety of different ways. None more so, it seems, than in the education space. And so, in that particular spirit, today I have a couple of guests to discuss these many things. First, my good friend and it seems erstwhile co-host at times because you've been doing these for the last forever with me, but Matt Konwiser, who happens to be a field CTO at a small company called IBM. And joining us today is a new person who has not been on the podcast before, but knows a lot about AI, a guy by the name of Lance Eaton, who also happens to work for a university like I do, but he's at a different university. He's on the East, I'm on the West. He's at Northeastern University, I'm at the University of Utah. So this is going to be a very interesting academic type conversation. But Lance, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Why don't we start out with, okay, Matt, we already know all the super cool things about you. Voltron, AI Whisperer, everything. But Lance, we don't know much about you. So could you take maybe 30, 45 seconds, tell us a little bit about you, how you got to where you are, and what your favorite type of food is?
Pizza. That one's easy. And chocolate peanut butter pie. So how I get to here, 20 years ago, I was doing the full-time adjunct, teaching way more classes than I should have, and trying to figure things out. And one of the ways I did that was with technology. That opened up a gateway for me to step into the doing work as an instructional designer. And I kind of realized it was a career I didn't know existed. And so acted as a instructional designer working with faculty for years and started to make the shift to faculty development. And during that time, just had a rich range of opportunities of thinking about technology, education, access, power, all of those things. I ended up doing a stint at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, where I was running educational programs there. And then when AI exploded, I was just in a really interesting situation where I got some really great opportunities early on to do some very public work around creating policy, around collecting AI syllabi policy, and just writing and talking about it. That led to lots of chances for me to do workshops and talks and interact with faculties and leadership so that I have ended up as one of the voices in higher ed around AI is regularly doing interesting stuff. And it's been a really interesting trip.
Very cool. So if I remember correctly, your position right now is Senior Associate Director of AI
And
in teaching and learning specifically at Northeastern. Is that
yes,
correct?
correct.
Okay. Very cool. Well, let's kick this off with a little bit of controversy, shall we? Here's a kind of a wild stat that we can use to kind of kick off. This is, and I can cite my source. I've got it written down here somewhere. I think this is 70 AI in education statistics and trends, according to Demand Stage. And the statistic is this: 86% of students at all academic levels, 86% of students globally are using AI tools, but only 10% of tools actually have guidelines for it. So in other words, it's at a much worse, shall we say, usage level than shadow IT. We'll call it shadow AI, which in the corporate world is obviously a term used very regularly, but it's very true in the academic space too. Lance, I mean, you're kind of watching this happen. You're watching it unfold right there from the inside. What do these stats mean? I mean, what does that tell you about where we are right now?
I mean, there's always the like, what's the story behind the statistics? So I hear 86% of students are using AI tools. And then forced to not forced, but what comes to mind are the questions of what do we mean by using AI tools? Is it just in general? Is it within learning? Is it within appropriate or inappropriate use? And within that, it's not shocking if because we aren't defining what AI tools are, which of course, if I'm pulling up my phone and using Siri or Google or whatever to interact, like I'm using an AI tool. That is the ubiquity of AI tools out there makes me wonder about what that really means. So there's a part of that I'm like, I don't know that excites me. When it says only 10% of the tools have guidelines, does that mean the institutions, the tools themselves? If it's the institutions, again, not entirely surprised. And like there I get into the nuance of 10% of the institutions have guidelines, 10% of the students surveyed are at institutions that have guidelines. So it feels a little fuzzy. Even if I'm just taking it at face value, though, that feels kind of right in the sense of this is an emerging tool or set of tools. It is complex in the ways that it can be used really well, the ways it can be used consistently or inconsistently, and the ways that it can be used problematically. And so to figure out a policy or a set of policies that can apply to at a given institution, which may have anything from 30 to 100 majors or 150 programs, like you're not going to have the same expectations in each of those disciplines. There might be some things that are universal, like don't cheat, but what does that mean when you get down to using it in different places? How we expect marketing, somebody that's a marketing major to be using AI is going to be fundamentally different from what we're thinking of in biology or in composition. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting statistic, but I don't think it gives me enough to get worried just yet.
Okay. Well, and the 10% figure is institution specific, citing that 10% of institutions do have some sort of governance in place. But, this is interesting from a business perspective as well, Matt. I mean, we would never deploy anything with 86% adoption, but only 10% governance. That would just never happen, I don't think. What do you think?
I think that that's so sarcastically accurate that I don't even have a response to it, which is stunning because I usually have a response to everything. I mean, we have problems in the enterprise and in business, right? I mean, and in some ways AI has simply amplified those problems. I was stymied today by a problem that we are trying to use AI to solve that could be solved with better system design, better application design, right? So I think that I think the problem that we have in the handoff from academia to the workforce is if we don't have tight governance in the use and rollout of AI in universities, and the students are going to be ill prepared for the workforce that has or should have significantly tighter controls over data privacy, data controls, data information, the appropriate use of AI, the actual cost of using AI. Because the other thing is, and I remember when I was in school, you got discounts for everything because you were a student, right? Everything was cheaper for both the university and the student. Well, when you enter the workforce, that's where all the premiums come in to make up for the fact that they're giving such heavy discounts to the academics. So there's a cost of abusing AI that is now having to be absorbed by the IT departments of all these large organizations. And that abuse can become worse if the students are attending schools that don't have the proper governance and guardrails around how and when to use AI, both in brand damage and in terms of just general operational expense sprawl. So I think there's two implications to that. And you're absolutely right. AI has become an amplifier to this because we have situations where it's so easy to abuse AI. It's really hard to abuse a single function IT tool. You put it in, it does one thing, it either works or it doesn't, or it works badly and you have to open a ticket to get it fixed. AI will do pretty much anything you ask it to. And a lot of times it will do it badly. Other times it will do it too well. And it's only that narrow band in the middle where it does exactly what it's supposed to do and does it not too badly and not too well that it serves the business. And I think we're stuck in the middle of this right now.
Well, and that whole thing is exacerbated by the fact that, yes, usage is definitely scattered as far as success is concerned. Pretty successful, not successful. Like you say, there's a certain range in the middle where we do seem to have some optimal effectiveness, but the lack of uniformity is part of what's causing this problem, right? With 10% governance and also 86% of students are using tools. 45% of educators say they haven't received any AI training at all. That's like just a little over half have received zero, zip, nada. Meanwhile, over half of students are using AI daily or weekly to be able to do these things. And so, and in universities specifically, 92% of university students are saying that they're using AI tools this year. That's up from 66% last year. So a real lack of uniformity. I mean, are we creating a generation of students who know AI better than their teachers? I mean, obviously we come from a generation where we know technology a heck of a lot better than the previous generation. Is this window or the moat between generational divide of knowledge and not knowledge, is that shrinking and shrinking and shrinking? And then the very people we're teaching to are using these tools so much better than we are, and it's affecting their quality of education, but also their performance in education. I mean, what do we think about that, gentlemen? Lance, what do you think?
We see these parallels, right? So the same conversation we're having right now, we were having 15 years ago around social media, and we're having 15 years prior around the internet. So I think some of this is when you get a technology that is very quickly diffused, there's these gaps of understanding and catching up. I think it's a real challenge in the education space of like a few things are happening all at once. The first is like the context in which AI comes into. Institutions are just getting over the pandemic, and I'll put that in air quotes of like every semester was a new way to do teaching and learning. But we've also have been like exposed over the last 2 years to a highly political onslaught of attacks in lots of different ways on a national level in the United States. I will not get into that full list, but that has been happening. Then
You're
we've got
talking
this,
about the weaponization of social media by nation states. Is that what you're referring to specifically?
no, I'm speaking more about, at least within the United States, a variety of typically from the right, political attacks on higher ed, whether it
Oh, okay.
is around, from at least this year, a range of defunding, being, having students threatened. A lot of different things have been happening that higher ed has to respond to. Like there's the education piece they're trying to do, but they're also being sucked into this very strong political delegitimization of higher ed. So like there's a lot of attention around that and how to like protect faculty, protect students. When we have the president saying things like, well, we're not going to allow international students anymore. We're going to yank their visas and things like that. Like all of these things are impacting higher ed. So AI is sitting in that context. And the challenge with AI, like there's lots of interesting ways of using it, but there's a few things that need to happen. Access needs to be made available and affordable access. And that's not something that has really happened from the companies, is making it. There's some approaches to doing that, but they are not the approaches that work. So they're often giving free access to students, right? Google has done this, ChatGPT has done this. They're giving free access, but they're not giving privacy, confidentiality, like the things that an institution needs. So they're not violating FERPA. So the only way to do that is you actually have to pay, and they're still not making them particularly affordable. So you've got that piece going on. You also have the piece that this is a learning context, and this tool is changing the way learning happens. And that's a deliberate process. Like it's not so simple to just, I'm just going to trade out assignments. Like now there are going to be different emphases, different outcomes, different expectations, different demonstrations of learning. And like everybody has to figure that out in every discipline. And that's also a change for students, because many of these students were coming through a very traditional, tests and papers and the like. Now a lot of that's all going to change. And so all of this has to happen while we're still not sure what are the appropriate and inappropriate ways to lean on AI that benefits learning and doesn't bypass it. And so there's all of those things we're having to try to figure out in 3 years or less, while the tools keep changing, because the AI we had 3 years ago is different from the AI we had today. So I would love for it to be faster, and also the actual cognitive demand to rethink learning now that these tools are available in 150 different disciplines feels like a tall ask, especially when there isn't real support coming financially from the world at large, these companies that are going to be making bank, as well as governments and other entities that want to prepare the workforce. Now you have faculty who have already been hamstrung by so many other demands, having to once again rethink their curriculum, rethink how they teach, how they engage with students for what will be probably the third or fourth time in 5 years. Educators who absolutely love teaching are some of the ones who this is challenging the most, because they put everything into their work. They come up with really elaborate, thoughtful, designed courses where everything is interconnected. And AI comes along and basically is like a wrecking ball that says, nope, you've got to start at page 1. And I think to me, that's a real challenge, is that we don't acknowledge is where all that labor comes from, where all that learning gets reconstructed.
Interesting. So you raise a lot of really, really good points. I happen to zero in on one specifically, and this is a very, very small segment of what it is that you just discussed. And so I apologize, but that's just kind of what kind of grabbed my attention. Matt, maybe now's a good time to bring up Matt GPT because you cited the moat or the gap between free tools and paid tools. And yes, the paid tools are definitely paid for a reason, but this may be a controversial opinion. I don't think that should stop anybody because the open source models that are available today, the moat between the actual capabilities of these open source models and what you actually get from these frontier models or these, foundational models that you pay for, that gap has been just narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. And now we're at less than a 2-month gap of functionality between an open source model being released, and maybe even less than that, maybe even less than a month worth of gap. And so the universities, how much responsibility is it for the universities to look and figure out how to use these open source models to create these tools and make them available to students so that they don't have to pay for them? I mean, this could be something that could be done at a university level implementation to the benefit of students. And maybe more universities need to take a look at Matt GPT because Matt GPT is pretty amazing, right, Matt?
I mean, so I don't know if amazing is the right word. I'm very happy with it. It does what I asked it to do, so I'm pleased. And I've gotten good feedback from the people that have downloaded it and made it their own. It's a guy I know who created Polly Pocket using Matt GPT. His name is Paul. But he took my code and he changed the name and changed the logo and tweaked it so that it does what he wants it to do. But I was thinking about everything that you both were saying. And Lance, I was remembering the university that you and I met at, which for the record was not Northeastern. It was another independent university that he and I both happened to be speaking at to address all the faculty on the same day. The faculty there was very keen to embrace AI, even though most of them were not teaching technology or AI. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even a technology school. It was a business school. I think that what has to happen, and I'll get to Matt GPT and how that ties into this, what has to happen is that everybody has to be less afraid of this. And I think that the ones that have to, and I'm just going to make this assertion and you can both debate me on it because I'm not a professor and you two are. So I'm walking straight into the lion's den on this one. But I think that the faculty that has the most to fear are the ones that use the most standardized codified testing and curriculums, right? So there's two types of professors and everybody's had both. You have the one that uses the same test that they've been using every time, every year, every semester for the past 10 years, and they just change the answers around. And so you can steal the carbon copies out of the trash can and analyze them and figure out exactly what they're going to ask. And then you have the ones that are just completely out of the box and creative and structure their curriculums every class for whatever's going on at that moment. And their focus is critical thinking and engagement and not rote memorization and testing. And I think that for the professors that use the latter style, they have less to worry about. And as a matter of fact, AI will in fact help them with their cause. The former group, they're in trouble because effectively AI could teach their class for them. And I think that the dilemma, the professor's dilemma, we talk about the innovator's dilemma. Now we'll talk about the professor's dilemma. The professor's dilemma is if you're teaching something like medicine or science or engineering or law, or one of these things that are by nature themselves codified, how do they figure out ways to maintain relevance when AI can inventory, assess, answer so many questions that they would have to ask in order to prove the institutional knowledge that those students need in order to get those types of degrees? I think that's the big challenge that educators have. And the tie into Matt GPT there is that it is a self-sustaining, locally run, fully open source research assistant that allows you to exactly what you need based on everything that's going on in the past 24 hours. And so if you needed as a professor or as a student to understand how the more institutional knowledge that you have to learn that could be decades old integrates with what's happened in the past day, that's where something like the open source democratized AI can really come into play, because you can highly customize that and make it entirely your own so that whatever you're learning or whatever you're teaching from that type of use of AI is going to be unique because it's not only current, but you wrote it, you owned it. It's not borrowed from some other platform. So I think that the answer is a combination of all those things. It's professors that are the most creative, that promote critical thinking, that learn how to use AI and that use it in a way that's entirely local, entirely open source, and entirely their own, and that blends all these different types of knowledge that they have to teach as part of the curriculums together into one package. And I don't know exactly the easiest way to do that, but I think that that's ultimately the solution to the problem.
Lance, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm gonna take the bait around that idea of like the course in a box versus the like creative and the thinking out of the box. I have a very different opinion, and that is the people who are doing essentially the course in a box, the thing that's largely repeatable, they are often leaning on publishers. What publishers offer nowadays are much more robust learning structures in their basically own LMS. And so they are also ones introducing AI and introducing high-end tracking and surveillance of students and what they're doing and able to report more. So in many ways, those faculty have less to change. Like they're less challenged because there's already a system in place that they're leaning on, which is what the students then have to pay for. Like they pay for a book, which is now more of an ebook, and it comes with a set of all sorts of activities, even simulations and the like. Meanwhile, those instructors that are doing that creative work, really honing in on what can be distinct and customized to this class, there is a lot more work for them to have to do because so much of what they were using or depending upon is now easily represented, reflected, done by AI. So I think that there's a real challenge there that makes it even harder for them than it might for the ones who rely on, say, publishers' materials. And I'll dovetail that into like, I love the idea of Matt GPT. Like, I love the idea of an institution doing that. But I would be curious, and I've taught at, worked at least 12 to 15 institutions over my life. None of them have open office. None of them have Linux or Ubuntu. Those are really interesting, powerful, important open source projects. They are by and large not what feels doable when you're trying to educate a large staff who are also trying to educate a large, ongoing, shifting student population with people coming in with a range of technology experience from none at all to like they are doing their own open source LLM. And so I think there's like, yes, I would love for that, but I wonder about the reality of that, given that in all these other areas where there are open source, like institutions are still defaulting to Microsoft and Google and the like.
So, a quick question for you. And I love the challenge and I accept it. And I agree with your points, by the way. I think that they're all valid. And as a non professor in the room, I
I'm
can't
not a
argue with them.
professor either. I've occasionally taught, but
Well,
not a professor.
fair enough. When I was in high school, I took physics and I took physics 2 and I took advanced physics. I was a big science guy. And one of the things we had to do in physics was study force, momentum, centripetal force, not centrifugal force, because it doesn't actually exist. I still remember that. Thank you, Miss Onifer. Appreciate it. So what she did to have us test all of this was build all these contraptions of rubber bands and tubes and marbles and then go to Six Flags theme park and ride roller coasters and then test everything. And we had this 30-page packet of information. Now, I didn't need to go to Six Flags. I didn't need to ride roller coasters and get on the spinny, pukey thing and do everything else that we did. Yet we all did it. Every one of us wanted to do it because it was a way to attach the institutional knowledge that we had to have about the basic laws of physics to remembering the basic laws of physics by saying, oh, yeah, I remember when I was riding on that roller coaster and did that loop and I saw this marble in this tube go like this and I could read the number on it as it went through the loop. That was before they implemented all the safety features that said you can't hold anything on roller coasters. But back then they didn't really care about safety. It was more about fun, which I preferred. But the idea was it was an institutional knowledge instructor that was being highly creative about how they taught the knowledge and like those types of teachers, even with these programs that are becoming more advanced and more AI aware, if you don't have that very kinesthetic activity to bind to it, you're going to have a lot of students that are going to get lost because it's just book knowledge. No matter how inventive the lesson is or how well it's worded or how advanced the structure is and the lesson plan is, it's still just book knowledge, except it's coming from a screen and you've got nothing tangible to lock into. So that would be the only thing I would say is an asterisk to your point.
Yeah. I mean, the two things come to mind. I think that the physical, like experiential learning is absolutely real and important. And that's going to be probably one of the major gateways that we lean more into in this. I think in your example, I think is awesome. And like the first thing that went to my mind was like, I wonder what the kid in the wheelchair did. Like, I wonder about the person who so there's an accessibility piece that probably was not explored back then. Hopefully those types of things are now. But that also, I'm also thinking about, well, in those virtual spaces now, like there are simulations, and we do know simulations. We've seen it in flights, we've seen it in nursing. Like there's still something experiential that happens there that is transferable. I am not saying we replace everything with simulations, but I do think in the absence of students being able to sometimes do some of the things that we've seen in the past, sometimes are really hard because we have non-traditional students. There's I can't believe I'm supporting or I'm so advocating about faculty using textbooks materials, but like there is a space for that, I guess. It's not a space I think I could ever find myself, but I could see there's value there. And ideally, to your point, Matt, like there's something else experiential, more tangible, more lived that comes with it.
So we did have, by the way, there was a backup plan for people that couldn't go, or for the folks in wheelchairs or on crutches, because there's always somebody that broke something because it was a fairly aggressive high school with a big athletic program. So everybody could go, and then the folks that could ride the rides got to ride them, and if not, then there was backup data in the packet so they could use a friend that was able to ride. But you brought up a really good point that I didn't think about, which is with the use of machine learning and AI and computer vision and all these other capabilities, you can now allow folks that couldn't normally ride a roller coaster to understand a little bit more about what that's like, whether it's through virtual reality or a full motion simulator or a number of other things. It creates an accessibility to real world experiences for people that wouldn't normally be able to experience them, which I think could be a tremendous benefit if it's used appropriately, which takes us right back to the whole basic statement of generative AI in the first place. So I'm not sure why we did that whole circle, but yes, there we go.
All I know is that, you know what, if unless we're actually on the holodeck, I don't know whether those simulations are really going to make me feel like I'm on a roller coaster. Just saying. Just saying. But, you know, got to get that Star Trek reference in there somehow.
Appreciate that.
Live long and prosper, my friend. So let's pull this a little bit closer to AI's use in the classroom, which is always a bit of a controversial subject because a lot of students are really using generative AI specifically for, taking assessments. I mean, this last year, and I don't know how many of these students are actually being honest or not, but the estimation is from somewhere in the 50 percentile up to the high 80 percentile of students that are now admitting that they're taking AI and using them in tests. I mean, can educators even detect AI generated work anymore? Is this a war that we've already lost? I mean, and these questions also apply to the business world, the enterprise world. I mean, AI is being used to augment human work all the time, but why is educating still treating AI assistants like cheating instead of like a core skill? Because in the workplace, using AI is definitely a production tool. It's an efficiency tool. It's something that's able to augment. And yet I'm in a situation as a professor where I'm standing up in front of the class saying, I don't want you to use ChatGPT while we're taking these quizzes. Should we be teaching with AI? Or should we be teaching about AI? What does authentic student work even mean? How do we maintain that rigor while trying to embrace AI tools, but still make sure that we're doing the right thing by the students and their ability to gain knowledge?
I'm sure we can answer that and solve all very simply. No.
He said facetiously.
Right. I think so. There's lots of different ways I've been thinking about and in conversation about this. I am definitely of the mind that and I say this pretty regularly, abstinence is not a strategy. Like it didn't work for prohibition or the war on drugs or anything like that, that we have to engage with it. We have to, often with students, figure it out together. I do think we have to figure out, and this is really the hard part of where does it fit? Because we do see some of the studies about, cognitive load or cognitive laziness, and I have a lot of criticism of a lot of those studies, but there is a pretty straightforward understanding is the less you do something, the less you're able to do something. And the thing is, we don't know in every discipline what are the things we need to hold on to as skills and what are the things we can outsource to AI. And there's a really great book called The Skills Code by Matt Bean, and he digs into this and he looks at it in a way that I like. This has been the book. There's two books that are now my go-to books around thinking about this, and this is one of them. And what he does is he helps to articulate this problem where if you are an expert in something, in one space he's looking at like surgeons. If you're an expert, you have the embodied knowledge. You have not just learned it book wise, but experientially. It is there in your bones. If you are somebody who's just stepping into that, like you're a med student, you may start to build that book knowledge, but you don't have that experiential aspect. And one of the challenges that they're recognizing right now that's happening is because of the role of robots and the role of controls now, that technology has taken up the space in the middle. So if you are a experienced surgeon working with a med student and the med student is trying to do a surgery, the experienced person has the controls now to stop the robot from doing it that the student is manipulating and take over. And so what happens is that student loses a lot of that embodied knowledge. It does not prepare them to be a surgeon on their own. And it makes sense. We do not want people harmed in the surgery room. But compared to before the robot was in the surgery room, that dynamic, the person really had to learn and be in there. And there wasn't an opportunity for the senior surgeon couldn't come in and take their hands while they've got the scalpel. And so that is a good microcosm of the question we're grappling with, which is what are the things that really need to be held onto, really need to be fostered, and what are the things we can let go? And if we're just not going to figure that out in 2 years, because so much of this is about the accumulation of skills and learning that happens both in in formal education, but also once they're on the job to become those experts that happen 5, 10, 15 years out. It's very sticky. It's not so simple as we'll just use AI. It's really where do we deploy it thoughtfully that enhances, that magnifies student learning? Where do we want to put up caution signs that if you use it like this, the result is going to be you're less productive or you're less useful in the thing you're aspiring to become.
Interesting perspective. I agree with many of the things that you just stated. There are some interesting differences, though. And not to poke holes in your analogy, but medical students can operate on cadavers in practice before they actually do the thing. And so there's certainly simulation that can be done, not holodeck level simulation, sadly, but there certainly are things that can very adequately in high stakes performance and education and learning and experience gaining. There are certainly a lot of areas where you can make it pretty close. But I think, and again, I hate to beat this baseball analogy to death, but it's very, very true. You're not going to know what it's like to face a 100-mile-per-hour fastball until you step in that batter's box and Aroldis Chapman is bearing down at you. I mean, there's just no way to understand until you're actually in there and gaining that experience. Kind of like any of these other major events in people's lives. You're not going to know what it's like to be a parent until you actually have a kid. You're not going to know what it's like to lose a parent until you do, and then you find out that you're growing up. There's just these different things that you just can't describe, that you cannot simulate. You can try to be prepared for it, but you just can't. AI is creating a very interesting dynamic in experience, in gaining knowledge, and I think that we're all kind of trying to figure out how to handle that. So I like the points that you raised. Let's talk about the other side of the equation, though, for a minute. Let's kind of flip this over to the workforce side of the equation. So let's say we do have these students that are starting to use AI and they're learning by AI, and maybe that's affecting their ability to uptake experience and to gain wisdom in a certain way. But what actually happens when those students hit the workforce? I mean, there have been estimates thrown around that 70% of different job skills are expected to change by 2030. And this comes from that same report by Demand Sage about AI and education statistics and trends. So that's pretty significant if we're expecting that much change in job skills. So it seems like there is a little bit of this mismatch between AI literacy in an academic environment and in a business environment. Matt, do you think we're graduating students that can prompt ChatGPT but can't actually think through AI outputs? I'm just curious. I mean, I don't want to refer to Big Blue, but I'm curious as to what you're observing when you're out there in the field. When we're seeing these grads show up, what do things look like? How are we gauging their success or their ability to actually do their job?
Sure. So, I mean, it's a good point, and it's a good time to remind everybody that these are just my personal opinions, not
Yes.
representing the company at this time. The stats you just brought up also reminded me of a Harvard Business Review article published a few years ago that predicted that by 2030, I think 1 out of every 3 people is going to have to get reskilled, and about 10 to 14% of the total workforce would get retooled. And I don't see the data changing significantly, but to poke holes in your hole poking of Lance earlier. So in other words, I guess I'm agreeing with Lance. To use the medical example and what we're seeing in the workforce, there's been a lot of articles that came out in the past 6 months that talked about kind of the death of computer science as a degree, right? People are graduating with CS degrees and they're expecting to get all these jobs, and they're finding that the job market's dried up because low code and no code has taken over everybody's roles. That's, to me, the same example as the surgeon example. You can forget coding in college and learn all the basics of business management and IT management, and then find out when you get into the workforce, like we're finding out and we're seeing, you still need to know how to code. You may not need to be a dedicated CS developer, but if you don't understand data structures, if you don't understand the basics of coding and application environments and application architectures, you're going to have a very difficult time. You're going to have a difficult time, from what I've seen in some of the roles at Big Blue, as well as in a lot of the customers we're talking to, because they are adopting no-code strategies and finding that they still need people with DevOps and coding experience to work in those no-code environments, because no-code is not no problem. It's just no code. There's a difference. It's a very subtle difference, but it is in fact a difference. It will generate something for you, but if you don't know what it's generating or why or how, you're not going to get it to work, because it doesn't always work out of the box. It almost never works out of the box. I didn't just say that, but it's a good thing this isn't recorded. So anyway, the answer to that is, I think that it is a benefit to the students, and it's a benefit to the universities if the faculty make sure that there's balanced curriculum, so that when the students graduate, even if they're liberal arts majors, they understand the basics of computer structures and algorithms. And I'll give you a very short, somewhat medical example and somewhat not. I spoke to 2 people in the past week, a race car driver and a physical therapist. This is absolutely true. It sounds like the setup of a horrible joke, but it really isn't. And
A race car driver, a physical therapist, and Matt
therapist, not the
Konwiser
same
walked
person.
into a bar
Two different people, and they did not walk into bars.
that you know
At
of.
least I don't think. That would have gotten them hurt pretty badly. Anyway, see, there's my joke. Anyway, so they both told me the same thing. I don't use AI. It sucks. It's broken. It doesn't give me any right answers. Everything's wrong. And I sat down with both of them separately and did exactly the same thing. I said, tell me what it is that you asked. So I put it into an AI, very popular consumer model, and it said, see, this is nonsense. Then I created a project, and I said, you are addressing a race car driver that drives this kind of car in this kind of category, and these are how you're going to make all of your responses. This is how you're going to structure them. And then I asked, literally copy pasted the exact same question into that project with those parameters, and it produced exactly the answers that this race car driver was looking for. I did the exact same thing for the physical therapist, and it did exactly the same thing for the physical therapist. And their responses were the same. It was, oh, damn. Okay, yeah, this is useful. It's not exactly what I need, but it's definitely useful. And I could see how I could use this now, whereas before I thought it was just a joke. And so if I didn't know what was going on incorrectly in their process, to be able to show them how to do it correctly. And it doesn't require coding knowledge, but you have to understand the basics of application structure and application architecture to understand what is going wrong and then fix it. It's a logic problem. It's not a coding problem, but that logic is often taught as a function of computer science or IT. So because I was able to help them with that problem and set up the project and frame it correctly so that the AI knew what it was asking for and could answer correctly, they would have continued to propagate the fact that it's a joke and worthless. And now they're like, copy and paste what you put into yours for me because I want to put this in mine, and maybe I'll actually start using this. So I don't think people have the luxury of being highly secular in their college courses anymore. I think it needs to be blended. But I also think that there is still a very viable need for computer science programs. Maybe not as many pure coders, but the knowledge is still necessary. And it's not something you want to learn on the job. You need to learn it before you get to the job.
This is kind of distilling down to the thing that we brought up in a number of episodes, Matt, right? What are those skills that are going to be more important in an AI world? Maybe not necessarily being able to write code specifically, but you mentioned logic capabilities, and we're talking about those different C's that we have talked about in the previous episodes, right? Critical thinking, creativity, communication, all of these different things, collaboration. I can't remember what my fifth one is, but that's basically what you're saying, Matt. It seems like that's kind of along the lines of what you're saying, and this kind of lends itself in the education space, Lance. How do we know that these job responsibilities and the way that people do their jobs and this reskilling and this retooling is happening? So in the higher education space, we face a little bit of a dilemma. How do we prepare these students for jobs that don't even exist yet? How do we prepare them to gain these different C skills or other skills so that they can apply them in a way that's actually going to work in the future? That's a pretty interesting problem to have, isn't it?
There's two tracks that come to mind. I mean, again, going back to, I think, experiential learning, where and when we can inject that makes a lot of sense. It's Northeastern does a lot with, but I also think about my previous institution, College Unbound. It's a younger college, only 15 years old. And they actually had a really interesting approach to this. And I think, to me, this resonates with me a lot, is all of those C words, the good C words,
Yes.
they are all contextual. And what I mean by that is, I would say everybody has them. And this was one of the things that I found really powerful at College Unbound, is they came from an assumption that they have these 10 competencies. They call them the Big 10, and many of them are the very things that you were naming. There's others in there as well. They approached it as we know our students already have these. The key is getting students to recognize that they have these. So critical thinking, critical thinking, students live incredibly complicated lives, right? One of the things I think about is, I can't imagine being a student today in the world in the way that it is, the role, like the dynamics of social media, the expense of college, the idea that you're going to go to college, you're going to possibly pay $200,000-$300,000 for an education, and you're probably going to get a job that won't even cover all your bills a month, never mind your loans, right? You're not going to be able to live on your own for a while. The vast majority of students, that's their experience. Then AI is here. And so it's an incredibly complex world that they have to navigate regularly. They have to figure things out regularly. And so what I really liked about College Unbound is these competencies. What they did is students built a portfolio around them, around each one, and they took personal and professional examples. And the goal there was to help students to transfer, right? Transference is, I think, one of the things that is really what's more needed, is helping students understand they're doing these things, right? If you were a single parent navigating, caring for your kid during the pandemic, you have oodles and oodles of problem solving abilities. That's all the pandemic was for you. So it's being able to sit with that student, help them reflect, help them capture what they did, and start to think about, what does that now look in different contexts. So abstracting, actually, it's very similar to what AI does, right? Abstract the structures and use that in other places. So to me, I think, if we flipped it, and this would be within education and also within businesses, of making the assumptions that our people have these things, but that our work is to help them see and bridge the connections, I think we get different results. I think we get better results where people coming in can feel more ownership, because that's also a piece of this, and also feel as often happens within companies of there's a variety of imposter syndrome. There's a variety of metrics that can feel incredibly alienating, or metrics that are not really measuring the thing that you're there to do. And that happens in education as well. So to me, there's something really powerful about recognizing what those core skill set are, elevating that they already exist in pretty much everybody, but helping them increase the transference in every learning context that they're in.
What do you think that this is doing then to the production of research papers? Because, I've seen a lot of AI related research papers being produced, some of which I would even categorize as lazy. It's such a broad topic, and there's so many ways to poke fun at it and call out its mistakes that people are just turning out papers by the hour. Fun fact, Matt GPT is trapping, on average, at 7 o'clock every morning within a 24-hour window, 179 new research papers produced on archive and published in major research magazines every single day on the topics of AI and machine learning and generative. So do you think that people are kind of taking advantage of this to just produce content instead of quality content? And how do you think that is going to change how academics look at academia?
I mean, you're pointing to something that was a trend even before generative AI, and that is like we in academia, both in academia and as a reflection of like the world, like the corporate world of metrics is, publish or perish, right? Like you have to be producing. Now, publish or perish at one point meant that's something you did once you were a faculty member. It increasingly means by the time you graduate with your doctorate, you have already publications. There is already a system set up that measures output, and output is publication. And there's an entire point system, which means as soon as you're doing all of this, it becomes a game system. So in some ways, we've structured it for this outcome of like we want more people to produce it because produce is the thing that's supposed to be important. So I don't know that I would say that is like AI certainly exacerbates it. That to me is a larger challenge of how beholden or trapped in like the productivity cycle and in some of the worst aspects of capitalism that higher ed is trapped in. Like it doesn't exist outside of capitalism, and therefore it's doing the same things of continuing to focus on production. And we see that in all of the metrics that higher ed institutions are supposed to put out to demonstrate, we're doing all these things. And like there is a reason for that. Like we want to make sure our institutions are doing well, but the ways we've decided what well looks like also means it sets up that paradigm of, well, now people are going to work to that, regardless of whatever that metric was supposed to represent.
So we've actually uncovered a problem that AI didn't create.
I would say a lot of the things that like we talk about as problems AI creating is not AI creating, but is just exacerbated. When we're at Bryant, I don't know if I was supposed to name the institution, but I did, both doing talks. One of the points I made is you can look at every single issue that people have about generative AI, the copyright concerns, creativity, offloading thinking, verification of information. It's like those are all the same concerns we had about Wikipedia. And those are all the same concerns we had about the internet. And that so many of these are just perpetual problems of technology. That AI is just like the latest in that trajectory that goes all the way back to writing, right? We go back to Socrates, and that whole writing thing wasn't a great idea. It was going to make us all lazy. So I think there's interesting ways that AI is right now, and for the last few years, like the thing that we're all like about, but there isn't a lot new in the conversations compared to, again, other immersive technologies.
Calculator.
Right?
Calculator.
TV, radio.
TV. Dang that technology. But I love technology. But dang that technology.
We wouldn't have a podcast without it.
No, we would not,
It's true.
for sure. So let's kind of bring this around full circle. I'm curious, Lance, just if you were to implement one AI policy change in education, let's say you had an opportunity to handpick one AI policy change in education tomorrow with no resistance, meaning that it would have to be adopted universally, what would that be?
I don't know if this is a policy or this is just a fiat, but it would be every single faculty member will get paid the same amount in the next year, but only have to teach half the course load and dedicate the rest of the time to really thinking deeply and figuring out AI so that the following year their courses are more fully prepared to navigate wherever we are at that point.
So slow down enough to figure out how in the heck we're going to adapt to this.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair.
I think that to me is like the faculty, there's so many of them. They are trying, they are working hard, and they're also doing a million other things. And it is just one more thing among the 50 different technologies and tools they have to work with in a given institution, coupled with all the different emails and all the different services and all the other things that like pull on them, like giving them space to really figure it out. I think we come back with such amazing new things and a sense of renewal for faculty.
Okay, that's fair. Matt, from a business side, what do you think is the action item that we can do as business professionals to make sure that we're getting involved in this AI academic transformation? What can we do?
So I'm going to say just be very deliberate and intentional with everything you do with AI, with your use cases. And I'm going to take a riff, and I'm not going to be a generative AI, and I'm actually going to give attribution to this. But Lewis Black, a long time ago in one of his comedy routines, said if a business could not explain in one sentence what it does, it should be illegal. And I'm going to adapt that to say, if you cannot explain in one sentence why you're putting in generative AI, don't do it. And then the adjunct to that would be, if you can remove AI from the equation and still achieve the same use case, you don't need AI. I mean, it really should be just those two very simple sentences that should govern all of the decision making. And I think that with that very simple point of view, it's a lot easier for students to understand what to do with their knowledge as they come into the workforce, because they can test for novelty, they can test for uniqueness, they can test for personal fit and personal interest. And the businesses can better articulate how they're using AI and how they intend to use AI. It's a better fit for everybody if you go back to those simple logic statements.
That's fair. All right, I'm going to throw one last controversial take out there and get both of your responses on this, and then we'll wrap the sucker up. So here's my sentence, or rather my question for both of you. Is traditional education fundamentally incompatible with AI, or can we save traditional education? Thoughts?
I mean, kind of do the thing where I make it more complicated of being like, what do we even mean by traditional education when we live in a system, right? Like where we live in a system where like 1/3 of students are now non-traditional students. So I'm going to play that game a little bit.
I'm not talking about traditional students. I'm talking about the traditional education paradigm and the way that we are administering traditionally how education goes these days.
But I guess it's that word tradition because like the classes I went to college in versus the classes I first started teaching in versus the classes that I see and participate in now, they have been different. They've been different in approaches, they've been different in technology, they've been different in modalities. So I rub a little bit against that, but I will still take an honest stab at it. I think there is a space. I do think traditional education needs to continue to evolve as it has over the last, as the last 50 years. And I think to me, this is one of the areas that I'm excited about is where this pushes, right? If we think about what's been going on, different technologies have changed the modality, changed the ways that we share information, the LMS, asynchronous, virtual learning. I think this AI, the representation of AI pushes us to be more authentic or come up with better assessments that are closer to the thing that students are doing in the real world. So I think it's one more nudge to make higher ed continue to be relevant. I think that if we can understand that and embrace that, then I don't think it's detrimental to higher ed. I think it's going to be a boon.
Matt, your thoughts?
So I think that in almost violent agreement with Lance, I would say that I think that it is education should, and I think always has been in good institutions, whether it's high school or higher learning, has been about the why and the what. Why is somebody going to university? Well, they're going there to learn the nuances of a specific area of science or math or a field of study or a professional service. And the what is the material that's needed in order to be able to perform those jobs when they graduate. What AI is changing is how and when, right? So the delivery of the content, the methodology of teaching the content, the structure of the courseware, the curriculums, the nature of how the professors approach things, and the accessibility of the information based on time of day or locale or even neurodiversities, right? So I think that, to Lance's point, AI very much supports the traditional education systems, but we have to embrace that. We can't fight it, right? Because I remember a few years ago, and I'll bring it back to the internet, actually in the mid 90s, there was a point when I was running networks for public school systems and for a state, and we were told we can't block or filter anything. So everything from adult content to mail order brides were allowed within the networks because they were taxpayer funded, and the First Amendment protected everybody's rights. And because it was taxpayer funded, we couldn't protect, monitor, filter. Then Net Nanny came out, and all the schools were adopting it because it provided a little bit of a safeguard without violating protections. Or there were court rulings that said, no, actually, you shouldn't be looking at that stuff in a school. And that opened the door. And I think that that's kind of where we're at right now as well for AI, right? So this is the pre-Net Nanny AI, where everybody's using it for everything all the time, and there's little governance and little restrictions and little regulations. And it doesn't mean that it's not valuable for education, just like the internet was valuable for education in the 90s. But we need to figure out how to cohabitate with it. And I think that if we can embrace AI as the mechanism that delivers the when and how, and we leave intact traditional definitions of what and why, that everything will be just fine.
I agree with both of you, 100%. I am very much a proponent for using generative AI as a tool and using it prudently. We just, as you say, we need to make sure that we're doing it in the right way. We're teaching people how to use it in the right way, and we're having the right and correct expectations of them in academia, because then that will translate to correct usage in the right ways in the business sector where profit is all. So we are very much aligned, the three of us. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a very interesting talk on AI in education. Lance, appreciate you taking the time. Both of you, it's a little bit later in the afternoon for you, so thank you for staying after a little bit late and doing this. And maybe we'll have to do this again. Who knows?
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there you have it, AI in education indeed. Just a hint, the next AI Diatribe episode will also be related to AI in education and the trickle-down effects in the workforce. That's coming soon. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can always reach out via contact@aidiatribe.com. I am Jason Lowe, your host, and we will catch you on our next episode.